Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning, in the beginning, yeah, in the uh, in the listen properly. In the beginning, yeah, in the beginning, in the beginning, in the beginning. You know, I think I'd have to say my favorite part of that is about halfway through, and it sounds like he's about to, he makes a big pronouncement. He said it, and then he comes in quietly. Nope, didn't say it. I just love how that, that reflection. That's how I feel in a way about the Bible. No matter how much I pour into it, no matter how much work I do, the depth of what is written in these pages, there is just so much to plumb that we can spend our whole lives doing it. And I think maybe that's, part of the reason of how it is spending your whole life thinking, wandering, participating in the things of God, and the scriptures are part of that journey. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in for another podcast of Challenging the Traditions of Men as we delve into these scriptures and take a serious look, an authentic look at the things that we've been told, the things that we think we know and understand, and take an authentic look, a challenge at the things that we have pretty much been raised to think that it is the normal way. And we've come away from these challenging conversations with maybe new ideas about how the Bible presents its information. So thank you for participating with us up to this point. And as we continue on, we hope that we continue to challenge your mind and keep you interested. Last episode, we finished off with In the Beginning, Reshit. And I know that surprised a lot of people, the depth and the range of just one word that Reshit translated in the beginning, and how big of an impact and the multiple usages, the three major usages that the Bible presents that word being used in, and how intricately they were connected and intertwined within their own culture of how they were used, creating this cultural expectation of when you heard that word. Now, when we take that word and we plug that into the context of the world Adam was born into, where we had a functioning system and he was the inheritor of a kingdom in which he got to rule and reign at the right hand of the kingdom. So it was very interesting how we saw all this language coming together. Today, we're moving beyond in the beginning and going past that Reshit, and we're going to travel into created. So now, just as we did with Reshit and got to see how that impacted with the son of succession, and we got to see Adam, the son, being created, we're taking a look now at in the beginning. In the beginning of what? In the beginning of who? Well, in the beginning of what? In the beginning of who? God created. In the beginning was loaded, is created loaded. So obviously, we're going to be taking a look into this, and we're going to find out what it contextually is being used for as we compare it to other places it appears. Because if in the beginning has a cultural association, the beginning of a kingdom, a son taking reign over the kingdom, the succession, the first fruit, covenant association, if that's behind in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. What were they looking for when they were looking for a new creation? All right. So I want to thank Lee, Steve, and Tom again for being here. How are you doing, guys? Getting ready for a whole new section. I hope you're excited.
Yeah, it should be interesting. Looks like you stumped us a little bit on the beginning part, so I can't imagine creation or created being covered in in one episode. So is this going to be like 9 more episodes, Dallas, or no?
Hopefully just one, maybe two. We'll see how it goes. How's it going, Tom? Steve, how you guys doing?
Hey, doing good, Dallas. Yeah, looking forward to it. So ready to jump in on the next step here, going into created and creation.
Yep, I'm the same. Hopefully it doesn't take too long, but you never know because once we dive in, we just go So we'll see.
That's the neat thing, right? Is it's a fun ride, and we'll see why and where it goes. So let's keep this vein going. Let's drop the fun social stuff. We're all here for this Bible stuff, so let's get to it. All right. So Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created. Again, another well-known term. It's got very many arguments about its definition, lots of aspects to its definition, and we're gonna not really get into those kind of debates. It's the Hebrew word in the Strong's 1254, the bara, which is to shape, to cut, to create, created. So to shape, create. And there's a lot of detail that's added to this definition, and it does actually get pretty intricate in the word formations and that kind of stuff and how people want to break it down. We, no matter how you break it down, aren't really held to those constraints because we're just going to take a look at that word bara, however it's constructed in that sentence. And what we're going to do is take a look at where else bara itself is used where, throughout the Old Testament. That will give us a really good idea, just as we did within the beginning, of how this word should be interpreted. So we're going to read it as create, created, shape, bara. So here we go. Genesis 1:1 is where we get our very first reference for in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the very first time this appears, interestingly enough, is Genesis 1:21. And what do we see going on in 121? It says, God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind, and God saw that it was good. So God created the sea monsters. Now, what's really interesting as we continue on, we're now going to see a very interesting theme appear when we read the word create. We're not going to ignore this creation of word usage in 121, but we're going to come back to it and we're going to refer to it as we see this develop, because this has a very interesting association as we develop this word usage. The next usage of the word bara actually appears just shortly after in verse 27 and 28. And what do we read? Well, verse 27, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Well, that's very interesting. That's very, very, very interesting. The very first thing that we see in the Bible being created is man. Now, when we skip forward, we're going to just go ahead just a little bit here, because when we go to Genesis 2:4, we get again the very next appearance of bara. And it says, now this is the account of the heavens and earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord made the heaven and the earth. Now, the word account there is the word toledoth, which is a very interesting word because that's the word generations. It's used in Genesis 5:1, where it says this is the book of the generations of Adam. In fact, the word toledoth is used multiple times throughout the Bible, and every time it is referred to as the word toledoth because it is the list of genealogies that follows due to the word use, the actual word toledoth itself, the generations. So when we read this, it says this is the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. Well, we just finished reading about 126, God created man and woman. And here we have Genesis 2:4. This is the account of this is the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord made them. And now we're going to go and read that Genesis 5:1 entry because it's duplicated. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day when God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. So we see that same attribution when we read, this is the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created, just as we read, this is the book of the generations of Adam. Now, when we read Genesis 2, verse 4, this is the generations of the heavens and the earth, it's verse 5 that we see that the wilderness is there. Verse 6, the mist was over the earth, but it was in verse 7 when God breathed into man and made him alive, Adam. So here we have the generations of the heaven and the earth, which was the creation of Adam. And in Genesis 5, we get the exact same story, Genesis 5:1. This is the book of the generations of Adam in the day when God created man. He made him in the image and likeness, which we just read in Genesis 1:26 or 27 and 28, where it said, and God made man in his own image, in his own likeness, in the day in which he created him. So it's very interesting because Genesis 1:1 tells us, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The first thing that we see being created outside of this great sea monsters, we get created man. And then we get a story where the man being created, his generations are referred to as heaven and earth, which is interesting because in Genesis 5, that same man, Adam, it's confirmed that those are the books of the generations of Adam when he was created in that likeness. So far, the creation has to do with the creation of man. So let's stop laboring there because it's a very, I think, straightforward. I just want to hammer that home. The very first thing we're looking at with creation is the creation of the covenant people. Now, when we take a look at Genesis 6:7, that's very interesting because we read, then this is, of course, in Genesis 6, where Eden is being destroyed. We see God announcing the judgment and the destruction coming upon them for their deeds. And in verse 7, Genesis 6:7, we read the Lord saying, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, from the man to the animals who creep and everything of the birds of the sky, for I'm sorry that I have made them. So here we have another reference to created, to bara. And what is it referring to? To the creation of man. That's very interesting because when we read Genesis 2, we do have that reference in 2:5. So we have 2:4. This is the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. No shrub of the field was yet there. There was no plant of the field, for the Lord God had not sent rain, and there was no man to cultivate the land. Well, that's very interesting because in Genesis 6:7, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land. So we get a lot of this similar language of all circling around create. We have God creating Adam, his generations, the generations called the heaven and the earth. We also got in Genesis 6 the destruction of the created people. That's actually, and we've talked about it before in Jeremiah 4, where they talked about there was no man in that judgment language as well. So moving forward, we're taking out of Genesis 1 and the early story of Adam that create really has to do with the creation of Adam, the covenant people, from the beginning of his creation. And then we see in Genesis 6, at the pronouncement of his judgment, there was an acknowledgement to God who had created man. So now we're going to move forward to Deuteronomy 4. And this stuff right now shouldn't be too shocking. We're all familiar with the beginning of the Bible. Created is definitely associated with the first covenant people mentioned in the Bible, Adam, and the creation of, his position. And just Deuteronomy 4:31. Just got a little lost in my thought there. 4:31. Okay. What we find here, now we're in 4:31, we're going to read a covenant acknowledgement. So we're in Deuteronomy. This is the law being written out. We have the story of Adam, where we had the beginning of his people, the beginning of the creation. That's where created. Bara was used in the beginning of the development of the people of Adam. Here we are in Deuteronomy, and we're getting into the language of the creation of the people of Israel. And this is their law in which they themselves have to follow. What's interesting is if we go all the way back just simply to verse 26, we have this very interesting charge. Uh, and it says, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that you will surely perish quickly from the land where you're going over the Jordan to possess it. You shall not live long. It's interesting how we start this section out, and this is a judgment section, and it's using that word heaven and earth again, talking about the descendants of Israel. But we're going to just skip a little bit here down to verse 31 for this interesting reference again to bara, to created, where it says, For the Lord your God is a compassionate God. He will not fail you, nor destroy you, nor forget the covenant with your fathers, which he swore to them. Indeed, ask now concerning the former days which were before you, since the day that God created man on the earth. So that's a very interesting and powerful statement, because this is God saying, I will not fail you because of the covenant. And then he says, Indeed, ask now concerning the former days which were before you, since the day that God created man on the earth. So we have that language association again coming together. We have the creation of the people, and we also have, very interestingly in here, it being associated to covenant people again, not just people, but covenant people. Now, when we take a look into Psalms, we're going to get a little, just like we do with all Psalms, we get a little bit more play in the words here. So for us, we're going to have a little bit more fun as far as the usage. I'm just going to skip here ahead. This is the joy of using a real Bible as opposed to just dialing everything up and having 100 slides open. I guess maybe I could get fancy enough to do that at some point. But today we're just going to flip pages to Psalm 89, and we're going to give a reading around verse 12. So Psalm 89, and we're going to be looking at verse 12. So we're going to start our reading quickly just here at verse 11, where it says, The heavens are yours and the earth is yours. Interesting. There we have that heaven and earth language again. Let's keep going, because obviously we're going to bump into created, bara. It says, For the heavens are yours, the earth is also yours, the world and all it contains. You have founded them, the north and the south, you have created them. Tabor and Hermon shout for joy at your name. It's fascinating that that language is all combining and kind of grouped together. We have that heaven and earth, we have God's creation, and it's referring to people groups. So again, verse 11 and 12, the heavens are yours, the earth is also yours. The world and all it contains, you have founded them. The north and the south, the peoples of the north and the south, you created them. Tabor and Hermon shout for joy at your name. So there we can see that the Psalms given us more understanding looking into this, as now we're moving out of Genesis, where we saw the covenant man, the covenant people of Adam being created, and that was the word bara used to create this covenant people. And we see in Deuteronomy talking about Israel and talking about covenant, and how we there say, see also since the day God created man on the earth. So it's that same language surrounding this. When we move forward into Psalm 89, verse 12, we get the same identification. This time, interestingly enough, we're talking about Tabor and Hermon. We're not actually talking about Adam. So now, or even Israel, we're seeing a shifting here, and it's not talking about the specific people anymore. So we're going to now move forward just down the page a bit to verse 46, and we're going to give this a continual reading where it goes into saying, How long, O Lord, will you hide yourself forever? Will your wrath burn like fire? Remember what my span of life is, for what vanity you have created all the sons of men. And here we have another reference of creation of the word bara being associated to man being created. So we're starting to see this theme really lay out very easily, Started a little slowly because of the choppy usage of the word, but I was trying to show how Genesis 1:26 and 27, when we compare that to Genesis 2:4, the creation of Adam, and Genesis 5:1, all three of those accounts are taking place of the same people, same timing, same language. And once we get out of that picture, that language continues in Deuteronomy. We saw also now in Psalm talking here with these other people. We see the statement, "You have created the sons of all men." Now we're going to skip forward into Psalm 102, and we're going to take a look at verse 18. When we jump into Psalm 102, we're going to read, "This will be written for the generation to come, that a people yet to be bara created may praise the Lord." So here again, we come across bara, created. And what's it talking about? It's talking about a generation to come, a people not yet created. So obviously, this is talking straightforward in the same terms, straightforward in the same language usage. And this really isn't that tricky. It's simply created as has a very high use association with the beginning of a peoples. We're just going to skip a couple chapters forward here and go to Psalm 104, and we're going to take a look in verse 25. Now we're going to go from 25 and down to 30, so we're going to give this a little bit of a read here. Now, we'll start at 24, right at the beginning of the section. It says, "O Lord, how many are your works? In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your possessions." There we go again with that creation language. "There is the sea, great and broad, in which the swarms without number, animals both small and great. There are the ships that move along, and Leviathan, which you have formed to sport in it. They all wait for you to give them their food in due season. You give to them, they gather it up. You open your hand, they are satisfied with good. You hide your face, they are dismayed. You take away their spirit, and they expire and return to dust. You send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground." Very powerful imagery, and so much stuff that we've talked about it coming up in this. We see you take away their spirit and they expire. Well, the spirit there is that breath. That word spirit, that's that ruha. It means wind, breath, and spirit, which we just finished reading in Genesis 2, where God breathed into Adam and he becomes a living spirit, a living creature. We also see how it says, when you take away their spirit, they expire and return to dust. Obviously, a reference to Genesis 3 after the curse, when God says, "Cursed are you, and to the dust you shall return." So here we have a lot of heavy reference again to this. And what does it say? And you renew the face of the ground. So we have a judgment scenario picture, but in all of this, we come across bara, and what do we find? You send forth your spirit, they are created. You take away your spirit, and they return to dust. Created, bara, again, being used in association with the creation of people. All right, now we're going to move out of Psalms, and we're going to move into Isaiah. But before we do, I'm going to open up for anyone to jump in as I'm flipping over to Isaiah. We're going through this at a pretty good rate. I think so far it's pretty straightforward. I think it'd be hard to say that the theme of created having to be associated with the creation of covenant peoples or peoples seems pretty evident. So as I'm flipping forward here, I'm going to be going into Isaiah 43. If anyone would have any comments, feel free to jump in.
So far, what I'm seeing is, that all the passages that we've read so far, from Genesis all the way through the Psalms, I was expecting to see a little bit more like Cosmos stuff, but I don't see any of it. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
I was thinking the same thing.
Right, Steve? Like,
That's like, okay, well, boring.
it's like all pointing towards man. The Psalm 89, when it is talking about the created people groups, all that you have founded, I thought it was weird that they used that kind of term to describe creation in regard to just only people groups. So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. The only disagreement I might have a little bit would be the one scripture where he was talking about Tabor and Hermon, because those are actually mountains in the physical location of Israel. I've actually been to Israel before, so that is you could be a reference to those actual mountains. But yeah, I mean, what we're looking at for the most part is not talking about kind of a physical creation, but it appears to be talking about generations and a people group.
That's a very good point, Tom, and I would absolutely agree with you. So that's why we have to, and this is where I would argue, keep in context the language usage of the Bible in that kind of aspect. So when it says the north and the south, Tabor and Hermon, we know that when the Bible talks about the north, there's an association, typically of judgment coming from the north. And there's an interesting association because of the nations of the north. And we also see later that the north gets associated with the tribes of Judah and their departure from Israel in that separation, and they're referred to as the northern tribes. When the Bible's talking about the northern mountains, absolutely that could be talking about the natural mountains, but considering that the focus is on the nations and the peoples, as the psalm said, it was talking about. I would also, when we take a look forward, we realize that the mountains represent nations all the time, and they also represent the belief systems of those. So, for example, we read Jesus telling his disciples that, don't be surprised at what they're doing, for if you had the faith of a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain and, pick it up and toss it into the sea. The mountain symbolism has lots to do with kingdoms. We have the creation of Abraham's relationship with God when they went up onto the mountain, when we saw the sacrifice with Isaac. We saw that became the place where Solomon built the temple of God and set up the holy site. That's where the temple of Herod was built, and Jerusalem. We see that whole idea being shifted with Jerusalem being on Mount Moriah, however you want to pronounce it, being the place where God meets the people. We see it's up on Mount Sinai where God meets Moses. Mountains were very important to the Mesopotamian people, so much so that the desert people would build these items called ziggurats, and these ziggurats were buildings that were the shape of a pyramid structure with a flattened off top. And these would be the shapes of a mountain. And then they would put their temple on top, just like Jerusalem created at the time when Jesus was there. They had the mountain, and then they had on the top of that the platform shaved off in a nice ziggurat formation, and they had the temple sitting on top, is Mesopotamian way. So I do agree with you 100% that it could possibly be talking about the natural. We are reading something in Psalms, and we're reading stuff with highly symbolic language used by the culture. So that's why I took license on it. But I totally agree with you. We would have to keep that in there. Cannot debate that, but I would argue that the literal would not be the intended focus of that. But absolutely. And thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah. Not a problem at all. And again, it was just you're 100% right, because it's we've got to look at everything in context. My mind just that's where it went. I'm like, Tabor and Hermon, those are mountains. So that's where I went right off the bat.
No, I think it's great. Fantastic. So, it is, I think, pretty straightforward. And even in these kind of contexts and awesome side conversations too, we see a lot of that forming up. So now we're going to take a look and move out of Psalms and Genesis. So Genesis painted for us a picture with bara being associated with the creation of Adam specifically. Deuteronomy 4 gives us another reference to that again. We see in Psalm this conversation with the north and the south. We also see the generation to come, a people yet created. You send forth your spirit in Psalm 104, and when he does send forth the spirit, they are created. So we cannot deny that heavy word usage. Now, when we get to Isaiah, we're going to jump into chapter 43, and again we're going to be confronted with that bara, and we're going to be confronted again with this continuing theme. And what is it? It says, now this is we're going to read verse 1. But now, thus says the Lord, your Creator, O Jacob, and He who formed you, O Israel. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. Very fascinating, very powerful stuff here. Why? Because here we have the creation of Jacob, Israel, the covenant nation. And we have bara being smack dab in the middle of this, verse 41, chapter 43, verse 41 of Isaiah. But now, thus says the Lord, your creator, O Jacob, and he who formed you, O Israel. That's fascinating language, because not only do we get bara created you, O Jacob, just like Genesis 1, I bara created you, Adam, but we also get Genesis 2, I formed you, Adam, from the dust. And here we have, I formed you, O Israel, whom God renamed Jacob Israel once he became a covenant member. And here we have that entire exchange in this verse. So that's a pretty powerful mention right there. But we're not going to stop there. We're just going to quickly slide down to verse 6 and 7, where he says, I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not hold them back. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Everyone who is called by my name and whom I have created for my glory, my bara, whom I have formed, and even whom I have made. And again, we get that very interesting. So this goes back to what Tom was saying. We can see now what I was saying that helps us bring this into context, because here we get that north and south again. And obviously, this is referring to peoples. And so when we bring that into that bara and into that formed language, we see it all duplicating and creating that context simply for us. I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not hold them back. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth, everyone who is called by my name and whom I have created for my glory. He created this covenant people for his glory. So that's very awesome, because here we have again, and what did he say? And whom I have created, who I have bara for my glory, who I have formed. So there we get again, Genesis 1, the bara, and Genesis 2, the form. And what do we have? The north and that south, which we also earlier saw being associated with the same terms, the same conversation with nations of the north and south in Psalm 89. We're going to go to one more verse, just slightly bit down the page here into verse 15. We'll just do a quick read from verse 14, where it says, Thus says the Lord, your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. For your sake I have sent to Babylon, and will bring them all down as fugitives, even the Chaldeans into the ships and in which they rejoice. I am the Lord, your Holy One, the Creator of Israel, your King. And there we have, straightforward again, bara, the covenant people underneath God. So this theme is pretty solid. It's pretty tight here in this one section of Isaiah in 43. And again, it's very pointed. Like, there's no really debate upon this. This is just information gathering routine at the moment. We're going to skip forward just a couple chapters to verse 45. We're going to go down to, or not verse rather, but chapter 45, sorry. And we're going to go down to verse 12. So I'm going to do a quick read from verse 11, and then we'll add that into to 12, where it says, "Thus says the Lord." So this is Isaiah 45, 11 and 12. "Thus says the Lord, the Holy One of Israel and his Maker, ask me about the things to come concerning my sons, and you shall commit to me the works of my hands. It is I who made the earth and created bara man upon it. I stretched up the heavens with my hands and ordained their host." So here we go again. Heavens, earth, man created, bara upon it. So, and again, what does he concern these people as in verse 11? That they're his sons, the covenant people, the heaven and the earth created man. So it's very interesting, powerful language. And we're going to now take that and we're going to keep this, because this is all Isaiah. We're going to let him kind of exhaust this idea for us a little bit of bara. And we're going to jump forward into chapter 54. Now, a lot of people are familiar with where we're going in chapter 54, so we won't go too far. Oh, wait, this isn't the one I'm referring to. The next is the one. So we'll get through this one here because this is interesting. Now, we've heard all the covenant people and all the covenant relation to Adam and now even to Israel, with God creating and forming both Jacob and Israel. We see the same language with other members. This is a very interesting usage. It's actually quite plain. So Isaiah 54 verse 16, it says, "Behold, I myself have created the smith who blows the fire of coals and brings out a weapon for its work, and I have created the destroyer to ruin. No what weapon that is formed against you will prosper," and we're familiar as this goes on. It's very interesting that even here, created bara is again referring to a smith. That would be a human, a people, not in the sense of a nation being corrected, but just a person. And then we have again, "I have created the destroyer to ruin." So he built this person to go out and cause damage. So again, bara, even in this kind of non really pronouncement way, is being again associated to human beings. Now we're going to take a big change here as Isaiah gives us his last usage of bara, and it'll be in chapter 65. So Isaiah 65, and of course this is that big one. We're going to jump down to verse 17 and 19 where it says, "For behold," again, Isaiah 65, 17 through 19. "For behold, I create, I bara, new heavens and a new earth, and the former things will not be remembered or come to mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I create. For behold, I create, I bara, Jerusalem for rejoicing, and her people for gladness." So again, create being used for new heavens, a new earth, a new Jerusalem. Again, a covenant people. Again, heavens and earth. Again, bara. And actually, interestingly, if we compare that to what we were reading in Psalm 102, a prophecy of a generation to come, a people yet to be created, the bara to come, a people to be created. And here we have, "For behold, I create a new heavens, a new earth, a new Jerusalem." Would that be the new people he created to come and praise the people? So it's very interesting crossing even between the word usages of Psalm and Isaiah there. So now I'm going to be flipping forward here. We're going to be going into Ezekiel, and then we're going to hit Malachi. So before we finish up with Ezekiel and Malachi in the Old Testament, did you guys have any comments upon how Isaiah ended up using bara there?
I thought it was cool how it was used, how we heard the word created also and formed. Having created and formed used in a lot of those was pretty intense. And then, yeah, and that last example about rejoicing in Isaiah 65, just rejoicing in this creation, this rejoicing for her. And in Jerusalem, it kind of reminds me of the Lord saying that it's good in Genesis.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about the connection with the form there, because we cannot deny that Adam was created and formed, and those are the two situations we see being duplicated here with this covenant people. So I think it's very important. In fact, as we move forward and we get into the usage of form later, we'll see also, yeah, it's got its own associations, and we're going to have to take that into account. And I think you're already skipping ahead to where those thoughts will end up. So awesome, and thanks for bringing that up. Did Tom, Steve, did you guys have anything you wanted to add, or do we want to just move on to Ezekiel?
Yeah, I'm just listening and forming my mind right now because I'm just trying to keep up.
Steve is no longer formless. He's forming.
I'm being formed.
Created, formed, and made. Those were the three words there. And are those all? I would have to look those up. Are those all the same words?
No, that's a very interesting thing. So created, bara, formed. Oh darn it, that just slipped my mind. And made has a lot of interesting. When you go into Genesis 1 and you start seeing what was formed, what was created, bara, and what was made. So yeah, there's the very interesting distinction all amongst those words. That's interesting. You picked up on them.
Yeah. I mean, it's but it's all kind of the same context. So makes sense.
Absolutely, and they are heavily into that same context, kind of like we saw with Rashid. Even though the son of succession, that Rashid of that strength of the kingdom going forward, and how different it is than first fruits, but how connected the two are, just as they're connected to in the beginning of a new kingdom, but how separate they are in their meanings. But they really can't exist apart from one another. And I think that's the same kind of concept there, Tom.
Cool.
Right on. So let's get moving into Ezekiel. We only got a couple in Ezekiel, one in Malachi, and we're already through the Old Testament for created. So let's go to chapter 21, verse 28. And what we're going to do here is go from 12, and we're going to take a look at 28 through 30, rather, on Ezekiel chapter 21, 28 through 30. All right, so we read in 28, "And you, son of man, prophesy and say, Thus says the Lord God concerning the sons of Ammon, and concerning their reproach, and say, a sword is drawn, polished for the slaughter, to cause it to consume, that it may be like lightning. While they see you for false visions, while they divine lies for you, to place you on the necks of the wicked who are slain, whose day has come in the time of the punishment of the end. Return it to its sheath. In the place where you were created, in the land of your origin, I will judge you." That is fascinating. Again, straight into it, no matter how it ends. Now we're looking at the judgment. And just as we saw with Adam, we had the reference to his beginning. Here we have a judgment being poured out and a reference to his creation and a land. Verse 30, "Return it to its sheath in the place where you were created, in the land of your origin. I will judge you." That's exactly what we saw with Adam. So it's very interesting overlap, word usage, and it's just self-defining, I find. So let's continue on to Ezekiel 28, where bara again appears for us. And we're going to go into verse, this time 12 and 15. So let's go take a look at 12, and we'll connect that to 15. And it was Ezekiel 28. So here we go, verse 12. "Son of man, take up a lamentation over the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, for you had the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. The ruby, the beryl, the lapis, the gold was in you. And on the day now, interesting, here we go. And the gold, the workmanship of your settings and sockets was in you on the day that you were created." So very interesting. We have a picture here talking about the king of Tyre, which is a king of, I do believe off the top of my head, I just lost it here, but I do believe it's Babylon. I'm pretty sure it's Babylon. And what we end up getting is this the same picture of Adam being played out here, but over the picture over the king of Tyre. You had the full seal of perfection, full wisdom, and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. You had all these precious stones, and the gold, the workmanship, was your settings and sockets on the day that you were created. They were prepared. Very interesting. It's just, I find it fascinating because, and as Leith and Steve kind of made mention, we're not coming into the creation of anything except covenant peoples. Now we're going to take a quick look at verse 15 where it comes, we're going to continue on up to 15. Verse 14, it says, "You were the anointed cherub who covers, and I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of stones of the fire. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created and until righteousness was found in you." So here again we find from the creation of when you were bara, from your creation, from where you were created. So it's fascinating that Ezekiel does not want to break this chain. We got one more we're going to look at here with Malachi. And we're going to go to chapter 2, Malachi. And as we can see here, like, I'm not trying to say, like, you can go into Psalms and Proverbs, and there's a little bit different of a take. This is outside of Proverbs, and they do have some associations to more of the making things. But what we're doing here is we're definitely seeing the heavy word usage. And we're going to sum this up here with Malachi 2, and we're going to take a look at around verse 10 here. And it's going to say, so Malachi 2:10, and it's going to put that again. Do we not all have one Father? Has not God created us? So there's no doubt that the Old Testament highly puts forward this concept, strongly puts forward this concept of created is referring to peoples. And most of the time, if not all the time, if we wanted to search these out deeply, covenant peoples. And then we see this being referred to in their creation and as part of their judgment, a restating of where they were created and came from. So there's no doubt that when we want to read Genesis 1, we have more than enough license by biblical word usage to plug in created an expectation of some kind of people. If we just want to look at the Old Testament, guys, here without moving any further in the study, when we read Genesis 1, in the beginning, Reshit being the beginning of a new kingdom, a new people, with a covenant first fruits association, and this kingdom, this people is going to be the strength of the Father moving forward. Does adding created, following that up, in the beginning, God created this people, heaven and earth. Does that make sense? That we should recreate it as a people group, a covenant people group. I'm going to bring this a little bit more structured, back the way we do this with Leith, as we've come to the end of the first main part of the study here for the Old Testament word usage of bara. When we read Genesis 1, are we and should we have license, and should we apply it to Genesis 1 as a covenant people group?
It seems like so far you brought up a lot of examples. I mean, from Genesis all the way to Malachi, the Old Testament, where this word bara, this word created, the same one that's used in Genesis 1, is used over and over again, and it's pointing to people every single time. And so that's kind of a big old slap in the face. Not to even mention the heavens and the formless and all that, that just sticking with that, it's unbelievable how people groups are described as created every time, which makes sense because he created man. I mean, it's not like a stupid idea, but that nothing else was brought up besides man or people groups. Or what was the example in Isaiah 43? Jacob, Israel, also created, formed people. Yeah, I'm just kind of going through my notes about all these verses. It's incredible. Yeah, so that's all I got right now. It's just I was surprised how the whole time it was pointing to people.
Yeah, it never really drifted that hard, and at the same time, if we're trying to establish, so if we were to go and look at a lot of studies, a lot of research, and we go and pick out a verse and we want to substantiate its usage somewhere, usually if you got a really good solid connection somewhere else, maybe two verses, and if you got like three verses to back that up, that's usually a very powerful it gives people a lot of permission to present their case, to have one, two, three scriptures that really seem to support their assertion. What we're looking at here is an entire section, the entire Old Testament. So I would suggest that we definitely have the license to apply this. Steve, coming from the position of not having that church history being put into you and having to hang on to these traditions, what do you say when it comes to, in the beginning, after our Rashid study, that whole concept of the son of inheritance who's going to bring the strength of the father forward to the kingdom, this first fruits covenant aspect, the new kingdom being created. And here we have created always being associated to a covenant people. Is it shocking? I know it's weird that we were looking for all this created language of natural things, but honestly, is it shocking that it just becomes boring old covenant people again?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think the thing that's kind of odd to me is like, okay, like when I'm reading created, when we're reading this, I'm just saying, like, but there's obviously a distinction that they're talking covenant people. So like if you just say created, like why?
Unfortunately, Steve, you're
Okay.
cutting in and out there quite bad. I don't know if you want to.
Man, at the point. Ugh. Yeah, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, there we go.
Trying to
There
get
you're back.
closer. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Right, yeah,
Sorry,
'cause it's
let's
the
give that
wind I was
another
in.
go.
No, I'm glad you said something because yeah. What I'm trying to understand is I don't understand why they're zoning in on like created. When you create people, okay, why wouldn't they just say like everybody on earth, let's say? But they're specifically talking about covenant people, so it's making me wonder what is the point? Like, I guess because they're in the Bible and they only care about covenant people. I guess I'm trying. I don't know. Like, what is what's so special?
Okay, that's a great question. So, what we see in the ancient Near East, so what we in Mesopotamia and that area, you would have multiple gods. That was the way they seen the world, that it was polytheistic, and a god would service over almost every aspect of every part of life. So, in order to enter into get blessed by that God, you would enter into a covenant with them. And this covenant with them would bless your city, it would bless the peoples, and your peoples would have to live by the God's rules, and this God would then give you certain things for living by those rules. When we take a look, for instance, at the city Babylon, they erected a ziggurat with a giant temple on top to Marduk. And that temple was called Heaven and Earth, the Adamenki ziggurat. And what that ended up being was, inside they had a law, just like exactly the same as the Hebrews, who had their temple, which is heaven and earth. And at the same time, their law was inside. And those were the laws of their God, just as Hebrews had Yahweh for their God. Babylon had Marduk for their God. and they took the rituals from Marduk and said, "This is what you'll do for us if we do these things for you." The Hebrews were no different. They walked, though, in covenant with a different God, so they had a different list of what to do's, and they had a different list of what you would get. So the covenant had to do with which deity you were united with, and that separated you from all others. So does that help bring a little bit more context into why the covenant is very important? Because when God would be creating a covenant people, he would be excluding all others, saying that this is my people. No other people are included in with what I'm doing. If you want to be part of covenant people, you have to become legally under all the rituals of this covenant. And considering that the Hebrew religion puts forward that God, Yahweh, is the actual one and only God, that brings the significance of wanting to be in his covenant. Does that make sense, Steve?
Yes, that yeah, I never have thought about this before. So okay, yeah, that's perfect sense.
Yeah, and so that's also why being outside of covenant is a really big deal too, because if you break covenant and you're removed from the blessings, you're now put into curse. Then there's now you have the punishments from that God coming on you. Then on top of that, if you're exiled, if you're removed from both covenant blessings and ability to have atonement, you're now lost. You no longer have access to God. You're now in perpetual death. Nothing you can do will ever end up good because you're away from God. So it creates this image of wanting to be in God's presence as opposed to being outside where the danger is. Does that also help?
Yeah, yeah, I'm liking this. Yeah, I
So
appreciate
that's
that.
why they wanted to be in the garden with God, because where God was walking, Adam was walking. So they were present together. But when they broke that, what happened? Adam was removed from the garden. That became the punishment, the curse, the death.
Okay, all right, that makes sense.
Awesome. So yeah, that's why the whole idea of when he says bara created, if he's going to create a covenant people, that's a big deal. And I hope that significance then sinks in. And so
Yes, it
understanding
is.
that, awesome, because that obviously then that's why such an effort would be wanting to be the people of God. So, Tom, now that we've kind of gone through the Old Testament usage of bara created, you have that interesting educational history. So, coming from a Master's of Divinity education, your life experience, you're a mature person now, much different worldview. How are you seeing bara again for the first time, so to speak?
Yeah. So what I'm seeing is the bara and the Rashith. I mean, they're going hand in hand, right? I mean, the Rashid, the beginning of a kingdom, of a royal family line, of however you want to say it, but the creation again, Bara talking about a people. I mean, so this is it's just a really weighted single first verse of the entire Bible is right here in verse 1. And so yeah, I think it's this is a new way of looking at things, because when you get rid of the physical, it changes everything.
Well, and if I can hold you on that thought as well, because if we read it and plug it in the beginning, so Rashid, God, Elohim, bara. We don't have in the beginning God created. We have Rashid, Elohim, bara. Well, if Rashid carries all of its weight of a new king taking over the kingdom, the beginning of his reign of the new people, they are a covenant people, and this will be the son of succession who will be the strength of the kingdom going forward. In the beginning of this new kingdom, and covenant reign, God created a people, the heavens and the earth. Does that sound right? Or does
Yep.
that sound really twisted?
Nope. Sounds exactly right. Yep. 100.
So I think we've I don't think we've taken any liberties. I think this is a pretty straightforward. I think this is pretty you know it,
Well, and Dallas, one other thing. I mean, what are kingdoms? Kingdoms made of? Kingdoms are made up of people and a people group. So, yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
that's a really good point. So it's only logical that if we're starting with Rashid, which is the beginning of a new kingdom, it's only logical that that kingdom is going to need to be filled with a people. And that's exactly what we find with Jesus. We have the beginning of a new people with a man, just like Adam. We have a new people beginning with a man, and then a group is added to him, just like Adam is created. Then he's formed. Just like Jacob is created, then he's formed. Just as Jesus was created, then it's formed. So we're going to do a look into the New Testament words that associate with create, I guess, next week as we're hitting the hour here. Funny enough, we were talking beforehand, and I was suggesting maybe we could power through this whole thing. And apparently, I had a lot more scriptures and a lot more to say about Bara than I thought I was going to do. So it looks like I don't think we should push into the New Testament stuff this conversations, guys, but we could do it next and finish off Bara and then go into the second aspect of Bara, which again, not surprising where it ends up. So what do you guys think as we shut her down here for this talk? This again, I think, scripturally speaking, is a pretty plain. It's very straightforward, and it would be hard to get outside of using that license in that context. So, after the Rashid, after the humans before Adam stuff, after looking at the context that Genesis is talking about in Genesis 1, which is a judgment coming upon a people and a new people being started, and we find now that Genesis 1's title is in the beginning of a new kingdom reign, covenant people are being created. So, as much as these really, like, there's no interpretations being put on these scriptures, I don't think we're really twisting or contorting or trying to make these things line up. But if we just let them sit as they are, and as clear as this is, where are you sitting at now? I guess would be a nice summary statement, because I don't think we're going to find much surprise next week when we hammer out quickly some of these New Testament verses and move on to the second aspect. Are we starting to see a whole new Bible here, people? And can we start hammering into it? All right, let's go backwards this time. We'll give Letha a reset. Tom, any closing remarks concerning everything we have up to today?
Yeah, it's just really neat. I mean, we're looking at again just really the first couple of words of the very beginning of Genesis. We've been through the beginning, and yeah, as you look through each verse going forward from here, you know, we're talking about okay, heavens and earth, and the very next verse starts out that the earth is formless and void. Okay, so um, you know, we're going to be looking at a people group, and that's our mindset. I guess our Western mindset is so far removed from what was actually taking place here and what is being written here um, as a ancient Near Eastern people. It's just yeah, we've got to look at this through their lens and not through um, you know a modern 2024 westernized view of the Bible being this simple, easy thing to digest. And so yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing on.
I really like how you pointed out that formed again in Genesis 1 as we look forward in that scripture. The earth was unformed. Well, what did we just see? God said he would create a new people. And what does he do right after he creates them? He forms them into a covenant people. So here we have a earth which is unformed. It is without a covenant people. It's amazing how this starts filling in all those gaps, like you said. So that's a very good point. And as we start to learn to apply these concepts that we're learning through this vast, basically what we're doing is just making a dictionary. And this is why I find it not necessarily, mind blowing in the sense of the work we're doing, but the results of the work, the repercussions of the words and what we're finding with their meanings. This is unbelievably powerful when it comes to understanding these things.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
what
mean,
I was going to say, Dallas. I mean, if you can't understand the rest of the book, I don't think, without understanding this beginning and all of what we're looking at.
I could not agree anymore. I think if you don't understand the first statement, you cannot understand anything that follows. And as we've discovered here in 15 weeks of conversation, in the beginning doesn't mean simply God made some space and plugged a couple planets into it. And I know I'm dumbing that down, but in a nutshell, physical creation is not apparent in Genesis 1. So, Steve, where are you at now with these comments? Like, it does seem that once we get through this created, a whole bunch of building blocks are just going to fall into place. Like, formed, we see the earth is unformed. We see creation connecting to formed, and it being earth being this people. And yeah, so where are you at?
Going along with Tom, you said that about the unformed thing, and then I'm like, okay, yeah, like I just think when the Earth is unformed, oh yeah, some space rocks floating around. He grabs them, forms them into a ball, and makes Earth. I'm like, wait a second, yeah,
Yeah,
unformed. Like there's not
yeah,
people, like covenant people. Okay, all right. This is kind of making my mind just like light up a little. Like, wow, I'm just totally reading this thing and just missing everything. I feel like, ugh.
Yeah, seeing that formed, just how it applies with created today, isn't that a neat, right? Like it just starts filling that in. If we say this, so I'm going to say this to you, Steve. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form. Well, created and formed are side by side, just like we finished reading. And so Adam was created in Genesis 1, formed in Genesis 2. And then we just read in Isaiah 43, God created Jacob and then named him Israel. But then it says he was formed Israel, the 12 sons who became the 12 nations of Israel. So that formed, when we plug it back into Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created a people. Why? Because the earth was without form. How does that hit you? Does that make perfect sense why he would have to create a people now? It was without form.
I mean, amazingly, yes. I mean, what the heck?
Isn't it weird that it's because
I'm
like
just thinking
basically
in my
we're
head.
just go ahead, sorry.
No, yeah, I'm just agreeing with you completely. Like this is just like wild to think that you could read it so differently. Like it just changes everything.
Now I want to pick on one of the terms you often say is, well, what would anyone say against this? And that's where I'm at now. Why would anyone say anything different about this? As far as I can tell, uh, there's no other way to read this. So
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to Leith here and let him get the final word. What do you think, Leith? We've got a lot being said here. What do you have to chip in with?
I think you're right. I think that is my favorite line that Steve has. How can you argue against this? Like that's definitely my favorite line. um, yeah, it's the Psalm 102 thing sticks out to me a lot. Um, you'd shared verse 18 with us, but verse 25 says, "Of old you founded the earth and the heavens were the work of your hands. Even they will perish, but you endure." and all of them will wear out like a garment, like clothing. You will change them, and they will be changed. Well, in verse 18, it says, this will be written for generations to come, that a people yet to be created may praise the Lord. And so I know that we live in a culture now where a lot of Christianity doesn't want to deal with the Old Testament just because it just hasn't been presented to them at all. We're a lot of our Christian culture today is just love people and don't lust after your buddy's girlfriend or wife. So this Old Testament study is it's great, bringing the first verse of the Bible and sweeping those words and these, like, and I love that dictionary term that you use, Dallas. We're creating a dictionary. Oh, more sirens. Okay, well, now you guys know where I live. Anyways,
I don't know how to respond to that. That's
yeah.
all right.
It's just every time I talk, almost every episode there's sirens. But anyways,
It's true.
but yeah, just bring in words. You know, from
Hope
the
you got a
first-
big gate.
Yeah, just the first verse of the Old Testament being and using these words and carrying it through Old Testament, and then just watching it bleed. You know, Old Testament should be called First Testament, but just watching it bleed into the New Testament and God's promise is just really exciting. So having fun with this, and appreciate the work and the discussion, guys. Thank you.
What do you have for thoughts? Because you have a more of a religious background on seeing that formed and moving forward now. Because when we apply that reshit to the created, that we have a new kingdom starting, a new kingdom people under God, and we have an earth which is without form. So the earth needs a people, and we see how Adam was bara created, then formed, and just like I mentioned to Steve, then just like Isaiah, we have Jacob who was bara, then formed. Looking forward into Genesis 1, Tom brought it up. I brought it up with Steve. I'll bring it up with you, Leaf. Going forward, it seems like we're about to crack open a whole bunch of understanding. That's like we've been learning a whole bunch of other things, and it's all going to come together here right away. How do you see that playing out for those future next few verses we're moving into?
Yeah, well, it seems like we've already, you know, we got the baking soda, we got the vinegar, and I think next week it's probably just going to explode like it always does. But you have all these elements, and it's exciting to watch all of this come together. I think that that we get to get excited about reading the Bible after digging into the first half of the first verse of the Bible after 15
I know I'm
weeks.
putting you on the spot after studying 2 words.
Yeah. No, but it's cool because, but like Steve said, it's like, that's an exciting thing. That's something that gets me pumped about wanting to get into the Word. And like you were saying earlier before the podcast started, we have 2 words now that we can take and run with for in all of our personal studies, and that we can never ever forget. We can never set that down as something that doesn't mean anything, or I don't know what this old writer really meant when he wrote that word down, and things like that. It's like, no, we do know what it means. And why do we know what it means? Because we're speaking we're learning the language. And just like, you know, when you go to court, there's legalese terms. And these legalese terms are used in ways that don't apply to our everyday word usage. And so we can't go into court thinking that we know what all this stuff means. You have to study that stuff and study what legalese means. And so that's why this whole biblical study of ancient, you know, several thousand-year-old words and word formations is just making studying the Bible a blast. And that's all I got to say about it.
Well, I want to thank you guys for coming through this and going through this with me. I don't know too many other people who, you know, if I would have said, do you guys want to go and talk about 2 words? It'll only take 15, you know, weeks of conversation to get into that second word. I don't know how many people would line up. So I appreciate you going through it. It sounds like everybody's getting at least enough out of it to enjoy, to be challenged, and to grow, and maybe have a, you know, like you said there, Leith, how can we unlearn this stuff it's generating for us a stronger understanding of the Bible, a better understanding of the Bible, and it's something that we don't have to, write down because you know it now. You can't take these studies, as boring as they might sound, to just find out definitions of words. But once you start plugging those definitions into words as you read, how different, but how assured you are of what's going on. And I think that's what's the sentiment being battered around here, is we're going away from saying this is what it could be, this is what it might be, to saying I have a assured reason to say this is why I think it says it. And like Lee said, and I think the sentiment with the other guys is the same. Now try and prove me wrong, and do so by using more Bible than I just established it with. So I want to thank everybody for joining us for Challenging the Traditions of Men. I know a lot of us have been challenged, and as we continue to go through this, we will continue to be challenged as far as where you are, where you're walking, and all the time you spend with us. I just want to thank you, because I know there's a million things you can do. We as the group appreciate it, and if you want, you can reach out and join us. Go to Facebook, where the Facebook group Challenging the Traditions of Men podcast is up. I have moved into Discord, but I left a link there. That link should be up permanently. Hit that link, jump into the Discord group, where we can take these conversations to the next level and move them along, because we need to keep challenging these traditions, because it's providing much, much understanding. So thank you. Wherever you are, I hope this finds you well. God bless.